All right. Oh, well, thank you. We may have nudged that a little bit so that
It's good on the camera. Looks like it's picking you guys up just fine. Cool.
more important to get him than me.
Sure.
Okay, well, it's good to be back together in person. Today, we have the honor of having Brother Shankara here with us. And Brother Shankara is a longtime friend of mine. And in many respects, one of my spiritual directors. We met probably 10 years ago. And we have worked on various interfaith projects over the years. Brother Shankara leads the Vedanta Center of Atlanta. And I will let him explain that. Stan, could I ask you to pass the copy of those around? And so I think maybe the best way for us to start, brother, is for you to spend a few minutes talking about your faith journey. Okay. Well, first of all, let me just say how honored I am to be here with you. Those who wish to offer their lives in service to others are very highly regarded, not just by me, but by the tradition from which I come. And so I'll just salute you this way. May we be safe. May we be healthy. May we be cheerful. May we have peace of mind. And may we go forward in the Lord's loving and protective embrace. I honor you for what you are doing and for what you are becoming. As Bob said, we've known each other for some years, and I've, of course, been somewhat aware of what he has done for his own church and for many others. But to address what Bob asked me to address, my own faith journey. I was born a war baby in May of 1942. We soon moved to Riverside, California, where I was christened by a Methodist minister who everyone called Pop Taylor. Pop Taylor became a very great factor in my life, particularly when I was 8 and 9 years old, when my father went away to Korea. And because I misbehaved in Sunday school, my grandmother, my mother's mother, said, very well, then you can come and sit in the sanctuary with me. And that was a great blessing, because then I got to hear Pop Taylor's talks and his great love of the life of the Spirit and, of course, of Jesus especially. And so I conceived of a notion of wanting to be like Pop Taylor when I was that age. But then, of course, the teenage years kick in and the hormones do their job, and it's passion, poetry, and so on. And so for some time, that kind of was in the periphery of the vision. And during that time, I got married and was married for 47 years to a woman who became one of the most successful short story writers of her generation. Her name was Marjorie Kemper. She left the body in November of 2009. If you want to look up perhaps her most influential story, you would go to Atlantic.com and type in Marjorie Kemper, Marjorie Kemper, and the title God's Goodness. It won her all kinds of prizes, and it was the subject of sermons all over the United States. In any event, that married life, as I say, lasted 47 years. She left the body in November of 2009. I had become a Vedantist in February of 1973, when I was still 30 years old, because I was looking for another Pop Taylor and was not finding him among the Protestant churches. So I was seeking a teacher, and my teacher, guru, drew me to him. His name is Swami Prabhavananda. There's no need for you to take any note of that, unless you want to look up some of his books, which are remarkable, including Sermon on the Mount, according to Vedanta. But I found the Pop Taylor that I was looking for. And so stayed with that tradition until now. Swami Prabhavananda left the body July 4th, 1976, quite deliberately. And I then came under the leadership of a man named Swami Swahananda. Swami Swahananda is the one who sent me here after my late wife passed away. The resident ministry of the Atlanta Vedanta Center came open, and he asked me if I wanted to take that position. We'd worked together for many years. And it meant taking monastic vows. So that's when I became Brother Shankara. Shankara is a Sanskrit word. It means one who does only good to the world. Now, that's not a recognition of what is, it's a ladder to. And so the ladder, that's what I've been doing since. Actually, since 1973, very deliberately since. So anyway, Swami Swahananda sent me here in August. I arrived in August of 2010, and I have served as resident minister of the Vedanta Center of Atlanta since that time. Nothing could have been more unexpected, and nothing could have been more gratifying as a way to spend the last chapter of my life. I'm now in my 80th year and very, very happy in this position and joyous in the service. Shall I now segue into what the hell we're talking about?
Let's take a break.
What are we talking about?
Well,
Here's your segue.
I came here to talk about Vedanta, and I gave you a little oration to let you know why I at least presumably have the right to do it. So Vedanta, which does not have an in the beginning, it's not Vedanta or Vendetta, as many people. That's why it's so big at the top. So you'll see how it's actually written. It means aim or purpose of the Vedas. Veda is the name of this scripture. There are three major scriptures of India. The three Vedas, And Vedanta means aim or purpose of the Vedas. It also is a pun in that it means the end of the Vedas. The end of the Vedas are the specific scriptural teachings, the principles and practices of self-realization. So that's, and they're called the Upanishads, Upanishads, Upanishads. So if with that, I'd like Bob to read this aloud to us, and then I'll do my explanation of what.
Pointing directly at the goal of human life, Swami Vivekananda said, each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. To do this either by work or worship or psychic control or philosophy, but by one or more or all of these, and be free. This is the whole of religion. Doctrines or dogmas or rituals or books or temples or forms are but secondary details. And here's a quote from Katha Upanishad. It is but few who hear about the self. Fewer still dedicate their lives to its realization. Wonderful is the one who speaks of the self. Rare are they who make it the supreme goal of their life. Blessed are they who, through the illuminated teacher, attain to self-realization. And we gather at the Vedanta Center many times each week to help one another overcome our human limitations, reach the goal of human life, and be free. It is a joy to share this knowledge with each one of you.
And that includes the 8 of you, the 9 of you. Bob has heard this before, of course. Now, this business of the goal of human life is self-realization or manifestation of your divinity. First of all, the word potential. It doesn't mean maybe it's there and maybe it's not. It means potential, like there's energy in a battery. But if you'd never seen a battery before, you would not know there was energy in that battery. Someone has to show you how to connect the poles of the battery and manifest that energy that's in the battery. That's what's meant by the word potential. This divinity is within you like the energy in a battery. Someone has to show you how to make that connection. This is the illumined teacher that is spoken of in the second of those paragraphs. What this manifestation of the divinity that is already within you is precisely what Christ was pointing to when he said, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto you. Now notice there's no qualifier in there. All but this, all but that. No, all else shall be added unto you. You will manifest the full. You will have access to all of the truth of your being. What St. Catherine of Siena was pointing to when she said in one of her writings, we know nothing until we know everything. St. Catherine of Siena, in case you don't know much about her, is really quite a treasure. Among the many Catholic saints of note, she is one among the most notable. We know nothing until we know everything. So what is it that Vedanta teaches? Well, Vedanta is a very big umbrella. The proper name for Hinduism is Sanatana Dharma, which means perennial philosophy. Not the perennial philosophy, but the encompassing philosophy that shows up in all great spiritual traditions that is ageless, timeless in its truth. So Sanatana Dharma is the proper name for what the British carelessly called Hinduism. So what does Vivekananda mean by this first paragraph? The goal of human life is to manifest this potential divinity. By controlling nature, all of what we experience through our five senses, our five organs of perception, and our five organs of action is what he means by nature. Everything we can know through our five senses and that we can interact with through our five organs of action. So, control nature, external and internal. By control nature, he doesn't mean monoculture farming. Okay, that's just one mistaken aspect of what happens when we control nature. He means not let nature control you. Nature is for the soul, not the soul for nature. So we learn to control nature external, so it doesn't control us. We're not dominated by things of the world. And we are not dominated by our own inner urges, our memories, our projections, all of the things that go on within our psyche, our waking awareness, our active subconscious, and our latent subconscious. These are the things that we learn to control. And he says to do this how? Through work. He's naming the four, what I will tell you about is the four yogas. But through work or worship or psychic control or philosophy, one or more, or all of these, and be free. Know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, Christ said. This is exactly what he's saying. Here he said, are the practices and principles of these four ways of going about it. This is what we teach at the Vedanta Center of Atlanta and all of the Vedanta centers in the United States. Vivekananda started these centers when he came here in 1893 and became very popular at the World's Parliament of Religions, was asked to stay and teach. And he started the first Vedanta Society in the United States in New York City in 1894. All of the other centers are, in a sense, a daughter of that center. He started the second one in San Francisco in 1900. Those are the two that he actually started. To teach what? Each of these, we usually associate the word yoga with the system of postures called asanas. And that is the purpose of it. That's called hatha yoga, physical yoga. And the purpose, the real purpose of that is to train the body to sit still for long enough to learn how to meditate. That's what hatha yoga was established for. Like everything else that human beings do, it's elaborated itself and become a whole tradition unto itself. It's actually part of this third yoga that he talks about, the yoga of psychic control. But I'll go through them one by one. First is karma yoga. Karma means action. So first through work, action. And there is a whole system of principles and practices that are described primarily in what is usually thought of as the New Testament of India, which is Bhagavad Gita. In chapters 4 through 6 of that book, Sri Krishna, who lived about 5,000 years ago, was a king, was also regarded as an incarnation of the divine. He taught this as part of this Bhagavad Gita, which means Song of God. The yoga of action can be summarized as living sacramentally. Everything that you do, think, feel, perceive, you offer to the divine. Everything becomes a sacrament that you offer to the divine. And by the way, Saint Francis of Assisi has an absolutely charming poem about a conversation he has with a squirrel, in which he says, I had a conversation with an old friend, a squirrel, and I was telling him about the sacraments. And he got so excited, he ran into a hole in his tree and he came back carrying some acorns, a feather, and a ribbon he had found. And I smiled and said, yes, you understand. Everything reveals his grace. And so this is what we understand when we live sacramentally. Everything reveals his grace. And so we live in a way that we offer everything to the divine, and we accept whatever happens as his grace, his gift. So that's karma yoga.
Can I ask you a little bit on the, you were saying about the incarnation. How do you determine if someone has been incarnated? What is, I guess I don't understand that. When you say,
He said so himself. He said, in every age I return, when vice prevails and virtue declines, I make myself a body and come among you to restore righteousness, to save the sinner. And the Sanskrit can be translated in a number of ways, but it would basically say to reestablish a sane society.
As we go along today, if you have questions, just raise your hand.
Yeah, raise your hand or sing out like he did. That's fine. By the way, I don't see very well, so I can't read your name signs. Otherwise, I'd address you by name happily. But thank you, Bob, for reminding me. Yes, just either raise your hand or just sing out like he did. It was a very good question. The other incarnations of the divine that are recognized by Hinduism are, of course, Christ. There's just simply no question whatsoever about who Christ is, not was, but is. And the others are Rama, who lived about 25,000 years ago, Krishna, who lived about 5,000 years ago. They're coming closer together because, as we can see, the world is becoming more degraded. The next lived about, it was late 14th, early 15th century. His name was Chaitanya. And the last, and of course, there is no expectation whatsoever that you will recognize any of these as an incarnation. But the last, which is very much recognized by the tradition that I come from, is Sri Ramakrishna, who lived from 1836 to 1886 in West Bengal near Calcutta. There are definitions for what a human being must manifest to be regarded as an incarnation of the divine. And each of those beings, each of those meets those qualifications. But as I say, none of this is meant to be personal instruction for you. It's just you wanted to know what it is that we offer. This is it. But thank you for the question. And anybody else who has a question, don't let it go by. When the question arises and you, let's get it aired, because otherwise you will be building on less of a foundation than if you get the question answered. And I'm happy to answer the questions, and I'll be finished here pretty quick with this description of the yogas, and then we can just open it up to Q&A. But in the meantime, anything else that you have, please bring it forward.
Yeah, I have a
Yes,
question.
please.
So within Hindu is the belief or faith that you pray to the divine in a different form or reincarnation that comes, or how is your prayer?
Your prayer is to your chosen ideal. Your chosen ideal is that aspect of the divine that your heart relates to, and that your mind understands in some wise. For those of you who are raised in the Christian faith, and I am also one, and still pray to Christ. And I don't mean that casually. But my chosen ideal became, for various reasons, Sri Krishna. And of course, I could go into the reasons for that, but that's be a waste of our time. So it is your choice. And if you have difficulty making a choice, this is where the idea of a guru comes in. Guru means one who removes darkness. Gu, darkness, ru, remover. Remover of darkness, guru. The darkness is the ignorance, which within the Judeo-Christian context is called original sin. We're born in ignorance. This is what Catherine of Siena meant when she said, we know nothing until we know everything. We're born in ignorance of our divine nature and of the nature of divinity. And the process of human life is described here. The true purpose of human life is to manifest the divinity that is our true inner nature. To find that kingdom within ourselves where the divine is the ruler, not separate from us. I mean, Christ taught non-dualism. He said, I am the vine, ye are the branches. Where is the vine rooted? The vine is rooted in the one. The vine is rooted in the one. So the one, the manifestation, Christ, and the disciples, the followers of Christ, they are all one. There is no separation between the branches, the vine, and the roots. So this is the non-dual teaching of Christ, that there is no separation between you. And this is what he meant when he said, be ye perfect, as my Father in heaven is perfect. Heaven is the kingdom, kingdom of heaven is the same thing. Within. Another of his teachings, which is in the Gospel of Thomas, I just love it, about what's without, what's outside of us. The shortest teaching that I've ever found. Be passersby. Be passersby. Don't get stuck. Don't get entangled. Okay, second of the yogas is the yoga of devotion, worship. Most of us, most human beings are heart-centered. They love and they want to be loved, and their relationship with the divine is most comfortable as a worshiper of the divine. Prayer, ritual, all of the genius of the Catholic Church, and I mean that very sincerely. A practicing Catholic is guaranteed salvation if you do your penances and you go to confession and you receive communion and you do all these things. You are absolved of your sins. Your karma, within our context, your karma is wiped out. You're not carrying any baggage if you're sincere and you practice, but you must do the things, which is what you're trained to help people do, is do the things that are the genius of the Catholic Church. So worship, you understand worship. There's no reason to, I can answer any questions about what we might mean by worship. Not that different at all from what you mean by worship. We have a morning service, which you call matanas. You have an evening service, vespers. We have exactly the same. The word in Sanskrit is arati, which means waving a light. We wave a light, we wave some incense, we chant prayers. And there is this heartfelt connection with the divine presence. So this is bhakti. And once again, there is a workbook for this. It's called Narada's Bhakti Sutras. And it goes into some detail about how to do this. And of course, Christ went into some detail about how to do this also. The third, it says psychic control. That sounds a little peculiar. What does it mean by psychic control? Well, our mind-body complex, which in Sanskrit is called chitta, this whole unit that we inhabit, chitta, the mind stuff. There are several nervous systems within this body, and every cell is alive. So all of this is the mind-body complex, which is the umbrella word, as far as the Swami was concerned, was. So we learn to control this whole unit through a system of practices called Raja Yoga, R-A-J-A, Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga is a system of learning systematically how to divorce yourself from a life of I, me, mine, and beginning to live a life of thou, be, thine, somewhat parallel to Karma Yoga, but having its own, and these are called the yamas and niyamas. No reason for you to take a note on that. It's, if you want to read this Raja Yoga, this is by a sage, great sage named Patanjali, not regarded as an incarnation. He was a formulator, a scientist, if you will, of how to control this thing that we inhabit, that our soul is a dweller within. And so he describes in great detail how to begin to live a life where you no longer have an adversarial relationship with the world, the I, me, mine relationship, and you have a thee, thou, thine relationship with the world, which is seeing the divinity everywhere, seeing the divine in everything. And there's a system of practices, they're called the niyamas or observances. Then having established that, then you, and it isn't like it's sequential, but the later stages won't really be successful until you're successful at those first two, to some degree. So then you learn contemplation, concentration, and meditation. Along the way, you learn to quiet the body, sit still, until you can truly turn the attention within. Go in the closet and be quiet, as Christ said. So that's Raja Yoga, and as I say, there's a workbook for that. The fourth is philosophy. There are those people who are intellectual by nature. None of these other things are really going to work for them. They're intellectual. And Aldous Huxley, for example. Aldous Huxley, by the way, was a student of my group. He was a disciple of Swami Prabhupada. So this philosophy, what is the philosophy? That the outward world, everything about the outward world comes and goes, including the experiencer of it. So why should I be involved in it to any degree other than that which I must? It's called neti, not this, not that. Within the Catholic tradition, it's called the via negativa, the negative one, turning away from the outside world. And this is mostly practiced by monastics. It's very difficult for a householder to live this way. I knew virtually nothing about this path when I came here. And my teacher, Swami Swananda, said he gave me two instructions when I came. Just two. This is how great a leader he was. He said, restore the status quo, because the monk who'd been here just before I came had really deviated from, he really strayed from the path. He said, restore the status quo and emphasize jnana. This philosophy path is called jnana yoga. Jnana means wisdom or knowledge. So, of course, I had to learn this. I had been, my path had been karma bhakti. The action. I was a businessman for 47 years. I was in business, successful, busy. And then the devotional side, which was rooted in those experiences of Bhakti when I was just. Some of you may know the hymn, I come to the garden alone. I come to the garden alone when the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear whispering in my ear, the Son of God discloses. And he walks with me and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. The joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. That was Pop Taylor's favorite hymn. And it was also Swami Prabhupadan's favorite hymn in English. So with all of that, there's no need for me to really go into that second paragraph. You can read it for yourself, and if you have any questions about it, I'll be happy to answer them. But I think it's probably best to go to Q&A at this point, because I'll be happy to answer. Don't be shy about asking the sharpest question that you feel like you need answered for yourself. This is not about my feelings. It's about your getting the benefit of having somebody who might be able to answer your toughest question.
So in 25 words or less.
You're talking to a storyteller here. You're talking to a shaman.
The Buddhist tradition
Mhm.
came out of
Yes.
Hindu.
Mhm.
Vedanta
Mhm.
came out of Hindu.
No, no, no. Vedanta, Hindu is a word invented by the British. The British came very late in the game, 17th century. They came, they conquered Persia. They looked across the river and said, who are those people over there? And the Persian said, oh, those are the Shindus. The Shindu meant the people who live on the other side of the Indus River. That's all it means, Shindu. Well, the British being lazy, I mean, who else spells it Worcestershire and says Worcester? You know? So they didn't say Shindus, they said Hindus. And they said everybody who lives on that rest of the subcontinent is a Hindu, and all of their spiritual traditions are Hinduism. Well, bull. Would you like to have yourself be classified with Southern Baptists? No, I don't think so. So Hinduism is an invented word of the British. The term is Sanatana Dharma, perennial philosophy, and the Vedas are 8,000 to 10,000 years old, demonstrably. I mean, there's archaeological evidence. So that's how old those scriptures are. So your question. Buddhism.
I'm afraid to ask.
No, no.
Actually, that was over 25 words, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
That brings
Well, I
up a
hadn't even
good
started on the question.
question, though, what you're talking about. So for Hindu, it's not proper actually to refer to any Hindu faith. That what you're saying is there's a lot of faiths that are actually
Yes.
or beliefs that are within that you would properly refer to your faith as Vedanta or
Vedanta.
Vedanta. Or
That-
some other
Yes,
faith that
there's-
is improperly labeled
There's
as
the
Hindu.
Vaishnavas, there's the Shaivites, there's the Shaktas, there's this, there's that. There's all these different, and within each of those general classifications, there are many subsets. But the thing to understand, though there are 330 million gods in India, they're all representations of the one God and understood that way. They are all just the personal experience of one individual who had such a powerful experience that it became objectified as an image or a hymn and attracted followers. So there are not 330 million gods or goddesses. There are 330 million representations of the one. Buddhism. If you remember the Catholic Church in the 14th century, what was going on? The church had become very corrupt, selling indulgences. Every priest was expected to sell indulgences and to write a contract and specifying how much what was being sold and how much it was being sold for. So they couldn't skim. Avignon had more lawyers living there. Avignon was the schismatic pope in France. Avignon had more lawyers living there than anyone else, so that they could write these contracts. Well, the same thing happened in India. Priestcraft took over all of what you see in that first paragraph. Nothing could be done without a priest, and you paid the priest for everything. Every little ceremony, every little indulgence, every little everything. So the Buddha arose as a reaction against this and established a religion based essentially on that first karma yoga. If you read the Four Noble Truths and then read the Eightfold Path, you'll see it's all about understanding the nature of life and how to act, how to think, speak, and be in order to overcome the fact that life is suffering. But it did not last in India because it did not have very popular in other parts of Southeast Asia. And there are now 3 forms of Buddhism. This is way more than 25 words. Anybody want to know what the 3 forms of Buddhism, or shall I just skip it? Sure. Okay, there's the small book, Hinayana Buddhism, which is most well known to us as Zen Buddhism. Zen is a Japanesation of the Chinese word Chan, which is a Chinesation of the word Gyan or Jnana Yoga. It's Gyan Buddhism, wisdom Buddhism. Neti neti. Divorcing yourself from the world. So it came, and now it's familiar to us as Zen Buddhism, which if you look into Zen Buddhism, it is emphatically a way of divorcing yourself from the world and becoming one with the divine without ever talking about the divine. The second aspect that arose because human beings are mostly heart-centered is called Mahayana Buddhism, the big book Buddhism. It's most Buddhists are Mahayana Buddhists. They have made either an incarnation of Buddha, an incarnation, which he emphatically and explicitly denied that he was, but they've made it into an incarnation of God anyway, or the more extreme of them have made him a deity, that he is the divine presence. Well, of course, he's the divine presence in the same sense that each one of us is the divine presence. But no, they mean deity in the form of God the Father. So that's Mahayana. And it has many, many forms. And if you compare the Buddhism of Thailand with the Buddhism of Burma, you'll find it looks like a totally different religion. In the same way that Episcopalian Protestants look very different from Southern Baptists. So none of this, by the way, is meant to be pejorative. It's just an observation. So, and the third form, Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism is exemplified by the Dalai Lama and his followers now, who are, if you want to know more about them, they're right here at Emory University. He has a whole bunch of his monks studying science at Emory University. The Dalai Lama has an institute. But Tibetan Buddhism, if you look at it closely, oh my goodness, it's not very Buddhist at all. I mean, the way the Dalai Lama talks in public is very Buddhist and very close to the Buddhist sutras, what the Buddha actually said. But if you go behind the walls of the monasteries there, you'll find that it is very much merged with Bioyan, which is the shamanistic indigenous religion of Tibet, which has many parallels with the Hopi religion as practiced here, and both parties acknowledge this. But it's very shamanistic. So Buddhism practically disappeared from India. There's very few Buddhists left in India. Because it didn't have a heart. So any other questions? As long as we have more time. We do. Good. All right.
Talk about reincarnation.
Oh, okay. Well, it's interesting that until AD 300, reincarnation was taught in the Christian religion. Christ himself was thought to be a reincarnation of earlier prophets, especially Isaiah. So the idea of reincarnation. Earlier it was spoken of, we are born in ignorance. What is this ignorance anyway? Well, what does it say in Genesis? The ethereal beings that were not physical enough to even know they had genitals that had to be covered with fig leaves, conceived of the notion said to be given to them by the serpent power. The serpent power in Sanskrit is the kundalini, that which manifests everything. And by the way, did God know this was going to happen? Well, what is it? What does omniscience mean? Of course, God knew this was going to happen. He forbade them to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but they conceived of the notion, blamed on Eve, which is, of course, because she's representative of that kundalini or manifesting power, that which gives birth. So this ignorance, it is born of our desire to know duality. The minute we come into duality, there's confusion. The sense of unity, oneness with the divine is lost. Suddenly we're presented with all of this dark and light, good and evil, you and me. That's the ignorance. So how to overcome the ignorance? The gift of more than one lifetime. You're born, you evolve, and if you want to know the evolution that I'm speaking of, there is a book by Swami Vivekananda called Jnana Yoga, in which he explains exactly what's meant by the evolution and this reincarnation. So we evolve, but we don't last very long. So we lose this space, this stardust spacesuit. The primordial universe, there were not the elements to make this spacesuit we wear. It's the product of exploding stars, novas and supernovas. All of the elements besides hydrogen and helium, am I right, are the product of exploding stars. An astrophysicist can track for you out of the Big Bang just exactly how it happened. So we have these stardust spacesuits, but they don't last very long. 100 and some odd years is a long time. But in cosmic time, it's not even that. I mean, it isn't even the beginning of this thought of the blink of an eye. So we have the opportunity, and this is described very, very succinctly in chapters 2 and 3 of Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, because Krishna's, I mean, his student Arjuna doesn't want to slay other people. And Krishna says, you're taking these spacesuits too seriously. And by the way, you're not the slayer. The divine being is the slayer. The divine being is the slain. And he goes on. It's very quite eloquent, chapters 2 and 3 of the Gita. So you go on and you are reborn and reborn and reborn and reborn, evolving and evolving and evolving and evolving until you become people like yourselves who understand that the underneath everything is what my teacher once said to me, we are each called upon to be a Christ. Swami Swahananda said to me one afternoon on a walk, we are each called upon to be a Christ. What does that mean? To give our lives in service to, and to give our lives for humanity. So this is what I meant by reverence for you, for who you are. You have evolved to this point where you see that your life is best spent, at least in good measure, offering it in the service of others. But this is yet we will expand even further. And God only knows what lies ahead. It is a wonderful adventure. But this is what's meant by reincarnation. We take body after body, evolving and evolving.
Any other questions?
Question,
Yes.
you mentioned gurus having a role within the faith. Are there any other roles or authorities or titles within your faith beyond gurus?
Well, you know, there because each of these lineages, that's what the churches are called within Sanatana Dharma, lineages. Calvin founded a lineage. You know, John Fox founded a lineage. So there's the teachers that are at the head of each of these lineages. Some of them are regarded as incarnations, a very few. I named them. Most of them are just. They're regarded as illumined souls, fully awakened. And so they have these. But because a monastic organization has its needs, there's a president, there's a general secretary, there are trustees. Even within our little center, I'm the resident minister. The head minister is a Swami who lives in Los Angeles. So I'm the resident minister. He's the head minister. He's the final authority if there comes any question. But we are a 501c3. The Vedanta Center of Atlanta is a DBA for a 501c3 called the Eternal Quest. And that 501c3 is run by a board of trustees, which has a board chairman, secretary, treasurer, da, 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 da. So there's all those roles. Guru is something that is not self-conferred within these lineages. Someone decrees that you now have sufficient realization that your words can be taken seriously by people, and you can take responsibility for their spiritual lives, which is what a guru does, take responsibility. I am not a guru. I am not a guru. By Swami Swahananda's special blessing, he told me in August of 2012, go and teach. That's the limit of my responsibility. So there's teachers, there's gurus, there's heads of lineage, and then there's these organizational types. And each of the, you know, the offices among the gods, small g gods, these are human beings that have evolved to the point where they can take that responsibility. The king of death, Yama, the king of the gods, Indra, like that, within this tradition. Good question.
Okay. Time is up. Thank you, brother.
You're most welcome. And thank you. And I mean it most sincerely. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being what you wish to be on behalf of those who serve. So importantly, your wonderful, wonderful church could not exist without people willing to give of themselves as you are giving of yourselves. I mean, that is just a home truth, as my granddad would say.
Okay.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming in.
Oh, you're more than welcome. And if you want to know anything more about what it is that we offer, then is able to be for an hour a day. At the bottom of the sheet you were given is a website. And you have,
Yep.
as a website. On that website, there is the best explanation that I can offer. It goes into a great deal more detail and has longer definitions of the yogas and so on. And also, because we've been Zooming all of our talks and classes, there are talks and classes on our YouTube channel. So plenty more information for anybody who wants it.
Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
More than welcome. And by the way, Buddhism is a noble tradition. It has generated a lot of saints. That is the definition of a true religion. Does it generate saints? And so you can be very, very proud of yours because the list goes on and on and on. And I'm talking about, you know, the Browns, the Eckharts, the Aquinas, the Saint Teresa of Avila, Catherine of Siena. These are amazing souls. I have a recommendation for a book. It's called Love Poems from God. Love Poems from God. It's with interpretations. He doesn't call them translations. Interpretations of these poems by 12 illumined souls by a man named Daniel Ladinsky, Ladinsky, Daniel Ladinsky. The saints that I mentioned are there, the Catholic saints, but then it starts with a Sufi saint of the, I don't know, 4th or 5th century, something like this. She was an amazing woman named Rabia, and you will be overwhelmed by her story and the depth of her wisdom and understanding. She is a beautiful soul. And Love Poems from God. It's something that I read virtually every day because there's so much wisdom and joy